So our next speaker is Katie Hellebush. She founded Hellebush Consulting, LLC, to provide innovative solutions for association management and governmental affairs for profit and nonprofit organizations across industry sectors. Her work is rooted in her experience in association management and government relations, successfully advocating on a wide array of legislative and regulatory policy issues at the local, state, and federal level. Over the last 10 years, Katie has worked with associations across industry lines and in varied capacities, from hospitality to agriculture to healthcare to chambers of commerce. Katie has developed a passion for working with associations and has taken on the challenge of developing skills and learning the tools necessary to accomplish the task. She has worked with financial, membership, and communication systems, as well as social media and web platforms. Katie continues to learn new technology to support ever-changing client needs. So outside of her work, Katie is an active member of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church. She enjoys spending time in the garden, running, cooking, and exploring all things Richmond. A graduate of the University of Richmond and a native of North Carolina, Katie's made her home in Richmond. Join me in welcoming Katie.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you this afternoon. I'm Katie Hellebush, as I was introduced, and I'm glad to be here with y'all, and it's a pleasure to work with you, the Virginia Sheriff's Institute and the Virginia Sheriff's Association. My colleague Helen Ames is in the audience as well. She's been your photographer for the last 2 days, and she and I together specialize in working together on communications for y'all, and that includes your dispatch, sending out all the legislative alerts and all sorts of different things, keeping up your Facebook. So I'll go ahead and give a plug to you that if you haven't visited the Facebook page, please do. We've been doing some live posts, and then we'll have all of the pictures from this conference and from future ones up there as well. So keep an eye on that if you're a Facebook user. So for today, John asked if I would talk to y'all a little bit about some emergency communications plans. We had been talking about it, he and Megan and I, as we've seen a lot in the news with different tragic shootings and that sort of thing. And so I kind of brought up the idea that I just wanted to make sure every office is prepared, whether y'all have a designated person who's in charge of communications or not. So we thought that we'd start off today by just giving y'all kind of an overview, and I've prepared a little template, just some simple tips, and then coming up in the fall, I think we're going to plan some more in-depth breakout sessions to make sure that there's some more in-person training. But again, this is the role that I serve to kind of help not only with the Institute's communications, but also with y'all to make sure you're prepared for all of your public relations and communications. So with that, we'll get started. All right, making sure that worked. Okay. As y'all know, there are lots of different types of crises, and so I always like to just start with a quick review of the different crises just to make sure that they're on your mind, and of course, your audience, you are well aware of all the different types of emergency situations. But just to review, they can come in any form, whether they're legal, they're human relations, natural disasters, corporate nature, personal, and violent acts. Being prepared going into a crisis is always my best tip that I can share with folks and what I like to do. So I've kind of outlined these 4 steps that y'all can use as you're preparing for the crisis, which of course I know you use anyway, but you want to think through what might happen, and then of course respond to the crisis. You want to manage it, manage the situation during the crisis, and then mitigate any disruption. So from the communications aspect, a lot of what you can do is have a lot prepared so that you can kind of take some templates, take some prepared statements, and then as you're handling the situation, you can tweak those and you can deal with the situation at hand, but you don't have to start from scratch. And if you've thought about your different crises and you've thought about your resources ahead of time, I think that helps. So, to talk about the communications plan, just a couple simple steps. First, if you don't have, as I said, a designated leadership team, I would think through who is involved, and you can think about crises that you've already experienced, and then you can look at maybe what your colleagues have as well. But I always would put together what I would call a disaster leadership team, and you certainly want the head of your office. You would want someone from legal, because consulting legal is always key before you put any communications out there. And then I would think about the key other members of your team who would need to be involved, other partner agencies, and then of course the public as your last key figure when you're dealing with situations. So if you go ahead and just make sure that you've kind of got those folks identified and they're involved in this preparation, I think that's very helpful. Step number 2 is make sure that you've got just simple contacts for everyone, and as leadership changes and staffing changes and that sort of thing, that you keep that up. I know sometimes it's easy to have everyone's contact in one place and then 6 months goes by or a year goes by, and some of those are out of date. So just something handy to make sure that you've gotten key information for everyone. And the same goes for some of your key vital information. So it's not necessarily your people, but to think about what other information you might need during an emergency. And again, it depends what kind of crisis it is. So think about, do you have, for instance, if you have legal counsel, not only do you need their contact information, but do you have all of the insurance or what other information you might need? So just kind of go through and think about your key vitals if it's a natural disaster, and again, y'all are the experts with this, but just make sure if you've got things in paper, you've got electronic backup, you've got access to them, no matter where you go, or someone else who has access so that if you're not in your office, you're able to get it. But I like to just kind of think through all of these steps ahead to make sure when it comes, you're not scrambling. And then step number 4 is just to think through all of your different scenarios. And of course, I'm happy to talk to folks if they have specific scenarios come up that require either a press statement or a press release. I know I've done that for some of y'all. And John has all my contact information, so it's easy to get a hold of me through him. But I would think that it would be helpful for you and maybe some of the key members of your staff just to go through some disaster examples so that you can think about it. So if you have a HR situation come up, just think about, do you have processes in place, and have you consulted legal, and is everything kind of in ship shape from that end? And then when you're putting together a statement, you can certainly say with truth, yes, we've followed all of our procedures and we've done all of this. So again, all the prep work that you're doing ahead of time is really helpful. So I would go through several scenarios, also thinking about natural disaster, personal, and other different kinds of issues. And of course, with all the different shootings that have happened, kind of think of that on a broad scale. You certainly never want to think about something happening like that. But I think if you go through that scenario, then at least you're prepared. And so you know who would deal with that in terms of who would be your point of contact and who else you would need to bring on to get the resources and do it fairly quickly. And then I'm sure y'all all have emergency plans, so it's great just to kind of insert this communications plan as part of that. But again, you just want to keep that up to date and review it every couple months, every quarter. Just depends on how your office works and how your staffing is to make sure that everyone's up to date who would need to be up to date. Step 5, in addition to be prepared, you want to review afterwards. So after you've had a situation, go back through, identify what was done well, identify opportunities that you could do better, and then make those changes going forward. And that can just be, a quick review of your policies, your procedures, taking account of what questions that were asked and challenges that you needed to have someone's contact information, or you needed to have other resources available that you didn't. And that way you can quickly make a list and then make sure to be prepared going forward. So I think both being prepared in the beginning and then also measuring what you've done and making sure that you can adapt to the next time is also equally as important. So we'll talk about a few specifics for putting together the communications plan. I referred to putting together a disaster leadership team. So first, this may seem like a very logical thing, but who's the first person who needs to be aware? And then they can contact the rest of the team. And then, of course, you'll assess the nature and the extent of the crisis. And then once you've assembled the team, whether that's virtually through an email, phone call, in person, depending on what your situation is, who knows about the situation? What do they know? What is the current status? What can we expect over the next couple of hours, days, whatever the time frame might be? And then I would go even further to say, what do we need people to know? And then identify the things that maybe are not fact yet, and so you want to make sure you're not spreading that information, of course, until it's been verified. And at that point, I think it's important to put out a statement if you can, depending on what the situation is, but only to distribute the facts that are known. And so to do that, if you've got a statement already prepared that can provide some sort of template, that'll help you. So I would look at this at just kind of putting together, a couple of parts. You start off with, the description of your office and your mission. And I know all of y'all probably have that somewhere, but if you have a template started so that you know that your first paragraph is going to be that, and then you can kind of shift to, this is the event that's happened, this was what was involved, who was involved, and then going forward, you can end with, we know this much information at this point, we'll be happy to keep you informed, and then the next step, maybe you have another briefing scheduled, maybe you don't, but at least you have kind of your 3-4 part template that's easy to put together. And I'm happy to, of course, help with any of this, but I think if you can have, again, as much prepared as possible, that's helpful. So to the prepared statement, again, you want to use that both internally and externally. Internally, you want to let all the other folks of the team know what's going on outside of your disaster leadership team, as well as both inside. So again, think of all the people who are going to be involved, from your team, your staff, your stakeholders, the public, and of course the public means the media, it means everyone. And then I always would encourage you, if possible, to document conversations and inquiries, especially if you're documenting the facts, and you obviously have your systems for doing that. And then media inquiries. Certainly you're going to have media who are interested and are asking questions, whether you want to or are able to answer questions. And so I think just some simple tips would be, if you don't already have one person designated to handle all media inquiries, it's just easier for the media, but also for your office. If you've got one person kind of handling everything, other people can forward emails or phone calls to that person. I know I prefer if people send me questions in writing. That way you can look at them, have a chance to answer them. You don't have to be put on the spot, especially when maybe things are a little fuzzy, if you've got an emergency situation. So that would be one thing that I would encourage y'all to do, and you can say that and include that in your statement that you've already shared with everyone. Please send Katie Hellebush questions at Katie at, and go from there. The other thing is, I think it's important to make sure you've developed relationships, and so even if you can't respond right away with all the information that you want to, it is important to respond to their questions in a timely fashion and with information available. And I've got a couple tips in some slides coming forward. If you don't have all the information, kind of how to deal with that as well. But I do think timely responses are helpful, even just to assure them, I've got your email and we'll get back to you. Finally, remaining consistent. That's something that you might not think about, but very helpful. You don't want to give one answer to one person and one to another. And then finally, again, recording all inquiries and conversations, and that way you also just kind of know the timeline of events. You know who's got what information, and I think that's very helpful in the big picture. Oop, hold on. All right, so we talked a little bit about your prepared statements, but again, just a reminder, even if you've got something very generic that you can work off, I find that that's helpful, and I make sure, even just in Word documents, to have a couple of different paragraphs ready to go at any time, and then I can just tweak them to the situation. So your foundation would just include the who, the what, the when, the where, and if there's a how. So I've prepared a couple of examples just to kind of get you thinking, and these are things that I've kind of written up. So the first example would be the Azalea Sheriff's Office responded to a near tragedy at Huguenot High School in Richmond, Virginia. So you kind of set out the situation. Then you would set out the facts as you know them. At 8 a.m. Monday, March 19th, VSA responded to a report of a possible gunman on the campus of Huguenot High School. Officers quickly responded and completed a thorough investigation and search of the campus. While the alleged gunman was not found, officers ensured the safety of all students, faculty, and staff. So again, that's one example of just kind of writing a simple statement just to recount the simple facts without getting into it. And then you follow up with a sense of your mission. The Sheriff's Office strives to ensure safety and security, and you kind of continue on, and I sort of took this from a couple of descriptions I found on websites, but you can obviously make it your own. And then leaving it with the Azalea Sheriff's Office will release more details as they are available or as the investigation is completed. So just an example to kind of get you all thinking of different things that you'd want to be able to write up quickly. So if you have that second part already worded, you've got some examples of the third part that you really just have to put together the who, what, and where in a timely manner. Sort of the Swiss cheese approach, which is one of my attitudes in life. Little by little, take one hole at a time. So another example, the Virginia Sheriff's Association is deeply saddened to inform you of the passing of Deputy John Doe. During an incident in March 2018, Deputy Joe was fatally shot or seriously wounded while responding to a call to the local nursery in Azalea. According to Sheriff Florimore, Deputy Doe was in pursuit of the suspect leaving the nursery when his car ran off the road. VSA commends Deputy Doe for his bravery and sends his deepest thoughts and prayers for recovery, condolences to family and friends. So again, you're taking a template that you can easily adapt to the situation, no matter what it is. And this is just an example that I've got written up in case we need it in the unfortunate circumstance. And you can, make it as detailed as you need to or as broad as you need to. All right, moving on to interviews. So how many of y'all do interviews on a regular basis or have had to answer questions from radio, TV, newspaper? Okay, so just a couple of tips. I've got 2 slides here. Remember, you're always on the record, right? So a lot of people will say, oh, I just want to pick your brain on something, and it may not seem like you're on the record. You're always on the record. So that's the first thing just to remember when you're chatting, even if you have friendships with your local reporters and that sort of thing. 2, you can use that friendship and the professional relationship by building relationships with your reporters. I think that's very helpful so that when you're trying to deliver a positive message, when you're trying to handle a crisis, no matter what the situation is, you'll really be able to use them as a partner in delivering the message that you want to deliver. So I've always found that to be helpful. And I also think it's helpful just to talk to someone if you know something about them. So if you do have an interview scheduled, maybe you'll want to just go look up something about them, find out if you have something in common with them, and then you'll feel more comfortable. Let's see, got a couple more on that slide. Again, I mentioned this before, you can always request questions and topics in advance, and that way you'll have an idea of what they're interested in when you go into the interview. And I always kind of write out some talking points. I don't always have, obviously, a slideshow prepared. But if I know that there's a hot topic that's being discussed, and I know that there are 3 talking points that I want to deliver, then I'll make sure that I've kind of gotten those on a note card. And I've used that for all sorts of situations, whether I'm handling press, whether I'm lobbying for a client and I'm trying to get a message to legislators. It doesn't matter what the situation is. I like to have my bullet points, and then that way, if you throw me kind of a wild card, I can easily direct it back to the bullet point and the message that I want to give to you. And then speak more slowly than you would do otherwise. If public speaking makes you a little nervous, as it still does for me, even though I've had to do it for quite a while with my work, take an extra breath, and also that helps you minimize your ums, which I still have a problem with, and I try to take breaths so that I don't say it as much as a filler. Breathe. Breathing is always good. Just helps you relax. And smiling too, I would say. Smiling and breathing also help you relax if you get a little nervous. All right, now we're ready to change slides. Finally, I would encourage you to remember that you're in control. You can only deliver words that you want to deliver, so don't let questions throw you, and the circumstances throw you as well. That prepared statement, those bullet points that you have, stick to those when you're talking. And I would have no more than 3. It gets really hard to remember if you have more than 3. So I would definitely stick to those. Finally, make sure that you're correlating one of your talking points to each statement. Again, it's just little tricks to remember. And finally, if you don't know the answer, don't try to come up with an answer. Don't lie, obviously, but just say, gosh, honestly, I don't know the answer, but I'll be happy to get back to you. I think people always appreciate that. And then, redirect it to someone who does have the information, and make sure to do so you don't leave someone looking for the information. You don't know what they're going to publish or use if you don't give them the information. And then finally, if you can, have someone else take notes to ensure that you do follow up on questions. If not, just make sure you have a notepad with you and a pen so that during the interview you can just write little notes to yourself, and then you'll be able to follow up afterwards. Alrighty, a few tips on press conferences in case you ever have to do a press conference. Trying to think about all the different scenarios for y'all. So first, always start with a thank you very much, showing that you're welcome and that you appreciate the question. So a sample, I appreciate you asking about such and such event. Thank you for coming. Then I would also encourage you just to provide the information that you are able to provide. We've talked about that before. So an example at this time, I'm able to tell you that X event occurred today at X time and X location, with any additionals that are both factual and legally sound. So again, back to the factual and the legal. And then finally, let them know that you will follow up with information as it is provided. And an example, I am able to provide you with more information on X event. I will be happy to do so. Finally, the big thing that I like to tell people is never say no comment. So that's your first instinct, oh, no comment, I really don't want to answer that question, but there's some better ways to say the same thing, but actually give someone an answer. And that seems like a little more productive. My instinct, if I'm watching the news or I'm listening to a report on the radio and a party says no comment, my initial thinking is, oh, I wonder what they don't want to say or what they're hiding. I don't know if any of y'all ever have had that thought cross your mind. So that's why I encourage you to actually say something, even if in reality you're saying nothing, which sometimes is a lot of what we have to do. So a couple of examples that I wrote up. Unfortunately, at this time, I am not able to provide further details to you. As soon as more information is available, we will make it available to you. So yes, that's a longer answer, but you're recognizing the situation and then you're confirming that you will work with the people who are asking the questions. Another example, I appreciate your question. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to talk about this. What I can tell you is that our office is following policy and protocol. So again, you're making sure people know you're following a procedure. It's not that you don't like them. It's not that you're intentionally not telling them anything, but just letting them know this is how it goes. Then finally, that's an excellent question. Once we are able to share with you more information, we will certainly do so. Easy, positive. There you go. You're answering their question, but perhaps not saying much. Alrighty, and so as I've said to you before, that I am here as a resource to you, happy to answer your questions or those of your colleagues, and we'll have a more in-depth presentation this fall to make sure that you're prepared, but we just wanted to make sure to give you a few resources. And if there are specific topics that you feel like you could use some help with, I would love to know that so I can tailor presentations and tailor resources to really fill your needs. So you're welcome to reach out to me directly or to shuffle anything through John or Megan and Susan. And again, it's a pleasure to work with y'all, and thank you so much for your time.